Assalamu alaikum. We are going to look at gems from Juz 8 of the Holy Quran. And as we know, Juz 8 goes from Surah An'am, verse 111, through Surah Al-Araf, verse 87. So the first one we're going to look at is in verse 151 of Surah An'am, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about basic commandments in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Say to them, come here, and I'll announce the most important rules of Allah. They are as follows. Do not take any others as his equal. Be kind to your parents. Do not kill your children for fear of poverty, as we provide resources for you and for them. Do not go near to shameful deeds, whether in public or secret. Do not take a life which Allah has made sacred except for a just cause under the law, and that's his command, so that you can reflect. Do not touch an orphan's property unless you're going to improve it until he attains his full maturity. Measure properly and balance justly, and we don't burden any soul beyond what it can bear. When you speak, stand out for justice, even if it concerns a close relative, and fulfill the covenant of Allah by struggling in its cause. This is what he has commanded of you, so you can take heed. This is my straight path, so follow it. Don't follow other paths, for they'll only divert you away from his path." Just a couple of reflections that we can make by looking at these commandments. First of all, the importance of Tawheed and the prohibition of shirk. This is the highest commandment that we cannot breach, right? So when Allah says, do not take others as his equal, he's talking about committing shirk. Do not commit shirk. Our allegiance has to be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is our highest priority. Our highest allegiance goes to him. We also see the importance of being kind to parents. That's very, very high in our religion. We also see another component that's brought up, which is about justice, whether that's in measuring things and doing things fairly and justly, or um, balancing justly, or even speaking out for justice, and the fact that your voice matters. In fact, as well as the importance of struggling for his cause. These are some of the most important components of the commandments of Allah here. We look next in Surah Al-A'raf, and in Surah Al-A'raf, we're introduced to the story of Adam and Eve and Shaitan. And there's a few things we can. So, the part of this story that I wanted to focus on is if we look at verses 20 to 22, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Then Shaitan began to whisper suggestions to them so he could make them see their nakedness, which had been hidden from their consciousness. The only reason your Lord has forbidden this tree to you, he told them, is because he's afraid that you might transform into angels or some other immortal being. Then he swore to them both that he was giving them good advice. In this way, he orchestrated their fall through deception. When they tasted the fruit of the tree, then their nakedness became clearly evident to them, and they began to sew leaves together from the garden to cover their bodies. Then their Lord called out to them, didn't I forbid you from that tree? And didn't I tell you that Shaitan was your clear enemy?" So a couple of things about the Shaitan. I want to look at his characteristics. Notice that he whispered to them. So he convinced them in a very subtle manner. And that is oftentimes how the Shaitan and his message gets to us, through a very subtle manner. Notice another point is that he lied to them. He told them lies in order to convince them and in order to prevent them from obeying Allah. So these are two characteristics of the Shaitan: the fact that he approaches people in a very sneaky, in a very subtle way, and the fact that he will go to the extent of misinforming, of lying, just in order to prevent people from doing the right thing. And the third thing I wanted to look at is the fact that one of the results of disobeying Allah was losing modesty. When their nakedness became clearly evident to them, and they began to sew leaves together from the garden to cover their bodies. So the fact that modesty and haya is explicitly mentioned in this story, the fact that shows that there's a relationship between modesty and haya and remembrance of Allah, right? And when you choose to disobey, when you lose your virtue, along with that is associated a departure from haya, right? And finally, the last reflection that I wanted to go over is also in this surah, Surah Al-Araf, in verse 55 and 56, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about manners of how to call to him, how to make dua. Allah says, call upon your Lord in public with heartfelt pleading, and also call upon him when you're alone. But in both cases, do it in a dignified manner, for Allah has no love for those who are unruly in their supplications. Do not create disorder in the land after it's been made right. Call upon him with fear and longing, for Allah's mercy is near to those who do good. So especially now in the month of Ramadan, there are times when we should be in the masjids and joining the witr prayer, joining the du'as that are made publicly, right? In iftars and events, all of that is good and fine. And at the same time, we're supposed to spend that reflective time alone with Allah, right? So we should realize that these are both ingredients in the recipe, right? We should have some times when there's benefit in congregating and doing things publicly, and there is definitely an essential element of doing things privately, right? So that you can strengthen your taqwa, you can strengthen that relationship that you have with Allah. And notice that second verse talks about the elements. It says, call upon him with fear and longing, right? So when is the last time you made a really good dua? You will notice that hopefully you had both fear of Allah and fear of what would happen if you didn't ask Allah for these things, right? So fear of Allah and longing, right? So longing means like really, really, your heart is alive. It's really present. It's really feeling those things that need to be felt, right? So these are some elements that should be part of our du'as to Allah. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik, shadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk, wal 'asr, innal insana lafi khusr, إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم.